Welcome back to Uncommon Christianity. And today we're going to be continuing talking about the Lord's Supper. This is the part three. In the last two episodes, we established something very foundational. We said that memorials matter to God. And Passover was not casual, it was sacred. It was guarded, and it definitely defined and dealt with their identity. It marked those who belonged under the blood. Those could only be the participants. And when Jesus said, "This do in remembrance of me," he was not introducing a new religious ritual, but he was establishing a new covenant memorial with tremendous covenant weight. So today, before we speak about restoration, we must face something very sobering. What happens when memorials are violated? Because, if we don't understand the consequences, I believe we will never recover reverence. If we do not recover reverence, we will never recover the conviction that we must carry for the memorial. So I want to go back to the Old Covenant in Exodus 12, where it establishes Passover as the memorial throughout their generations. Now you remember the lamb was slain, the blood was applied, and for 7 days there was to be no leaven found in their houses. Exodus 12 records it this way: 7 days shall you eat unleavened bread. Even the first day you shall put away leaven out of your houses. For whosoever eateth leaven, that soul shall be cut off from Israel. Then again, it repeats in the 19th verse. It says, 7 days shall there be no leaven found in your houses. Whosoever eateth that which is leavened shall be cut off from the congregation of Israel. Now, notice what's emphasized here. The house had to be cleansed. Leaven could not even remain in the house. God was teaching them something profound. You do not celebrate redemption while tolerating the corruption in the house. Again, this is addressed a little differently in Numbers in the 9th chapter, something even more revealing about the memorial. He says in Numbers 9, but the man that is clean and is not on a journey, but forbeareth to keep the Passover, even the same soul shall be cut off from among his people. That man shall bear his sin. Now look at this one. Let's look at this carefully. He was clean. He was not hindered. He wasn't on a journey traveling somewhere. And nothing prevented him. He just simply refused. This was not ignorance. This was not weakness. This was not inability. What it was a willful neglect of the covenant memorial. And the text says, that man shall bear his sin. So what is it? Sin? Why? What sin? Because covenant responsibility increases with knowledge and opportunity. In James, New Testament, he wrote to us and he explained this principle. He said, therefore to him that knoweth to do good and doeth it not, to him it is sin. So when a man knows what God has appointed and understands what it means and is able to obey yet refuse, that refusal becomes sin. Now, under Moses, refusing the Passover was not missing a ceremony, it was disregarding their covenant identity. It was rejecting what the memorial that it declared, I belong under the blood. Now let's take this whole mindset and bring it forward to where it's relevant, very relevant to us in the book of Corinthians. Paul was not randomly rebuking them in chapter 11. He was building a case from chapter 5 of what went down in chapter 11. In chapter 5, Paul wrote this. He said, don't you know a little leaven leavens the whole lump? Then he gives this command. He says, purge out, therefore, the old leaven. And then he anchors the whole letter right here in this statement. He said, for even Christ, our Passover, is sacrificed for us. Therefore, let us keep the feast. So Christ is our Passover. We are the unleavened lump. The church is now the covenant house. So leaven, which is sin and corruption, it cannot remain. Remember what we read under the conditions. They had to remove it from the house. And if it wasn't removed, they would be cut off, even if they didn't eat it. So Paul sets this up, this idea, when we're dealing with the Passover, because it's not just we're killing a lamb. He's saying Jesus is that Passover. And we must be rid of the old leaven. The old man is really not welcome in the celebration of the memorial. So in chapter 6, he continues and he says, don't you know your bodies are the members of Christ? Your body is the temple of the Holy Ghost. Now, personal holiness matters because we belong to Christ. And then in chapter 8, he says this, when you sin against your brother, you sin against Christ. To wound a brother is to wound Christ. Why is this? Because we are one body. We are bone to his bone, flesh to his flesh. In chapter 9, he gives a little personal testimony. He says of himself, I keep under my body and bring it into subjection. So when Paul thought about himself, he says, I understand the posture that must be maintained. Discipline matters. Carnal and natural appetite must not rule. He then moves forward in chapter 10, where he warns them about the failures of Israel. And he says, these things were our examples. Then he introduces the table before he comes into chapter 11. And he says in chapter 10, the cup of blessing which we bless, the bread which we break, for we being many are one bread and one body. Then he says, you cannot be partakers of the Lord's table and of the table of devils. The table is covenant participation. So now, with all that being said in chapter 5 through chapter 10, we get to chapter 11, and it's a collision with all of these things. It says they come together, they eat, they drink, but they shame the poor. They indulge in selfish appetite. They divide the body. These things happened in that meeting. So Paul says, when you come together, therefore, into one place, this is not to eat the Lord's Supper, not because bread was absent, not because wine was absent, but because reverence was absent. They were not discerning the Lord's body. And then Paul says the words we cannot ignore. For this cause, many are weak and sickly among you, and many sleep. For this cause, for not discerning the Lord's body. And we just went back and saw that Jesus himself is our Passover. We are united to his body. How we treat one another is going to matter. And for this cause now, because they're not discerning how sacred the body is and how much more important it is when we come to celebrate when Jesus died for us to make us that body. He says, for this cause, there is a connection now to this condition, weakness, sickness, and sleep, he says. Weakness is the loss of strength. That's a consequence. Sickness is affliction. That becomes a consequence. And when he says sleep, that's actually death. And that's a consequence. Paul is saying that heaven responded to the persistent, willful contradiction when we come to the table. It's not condemnation because we never know condemnation. We're Christ's. It's not a losing of our salvation. But in verse 32, he made it very clear what it is. When we are judged, we are chastened of the Lord, that we should not be condemned with the world. This was a family discipline. Now, under Moses, covenant refusal brought being cut off. But under grace, persistent violation of the Lord's table brought weakness, sickness, and even premature death. Grace does not eliminate covenant seriousness. It transforms condemnation, though, into chastening, but chastening can still be severe. God the Father guards what the Son has purchased. This is not meant to produce fear that drives us from the table. What Paul does not say, he did not say stop eating and drinking, but what he did say, he says, let a man examine himself and then let him partake. The answer is not distance. The answer is alignment. Judge yourself. Let's deal with the leaven. Let's repair the relationships. Let's discern the body and approach with reverence. Because the Lord's Supper is not a casual moment. It is a covenant memorial. And Christ himself is our Passover. We are the unleavened bread. We are one body. And how we treat one another in the Lord is deeply matters to the Lord. In our final episode, we will turn from all of this warning to restoration. How do we recover the table in our time that we live? How do we practice this memorial in our homes, in our gatherings, with reverence, with unity, with sincerity and truth, so that it produces life rather than chastening? Until next time, let Christ be seen in you, and stay safe.